We'll try this again. All right, so this is on House Bill 490 we're discussing. I passed out an email. I asked, the biggest, I think, discussion point that we want to have is around the definition of firearm, which was the latest add to the bill. I sent out the definitions as researched by House Community Services. We have firearms defined in 3 different places in our statutes. Um, the current amendment does a reference by incorporation of the federal statute, and there's some concerns about doing that. So we'll just start with the conversation on what the idea is. Again, I believe this amendment was added specifically to deal with Superior Court cases that are now tackling where felons who want to hunt with muzzleloaders are basically being charged with felons in possession of firearms, and that was never the intent of the definition. So I think a new definition is an attempt to clarify that and fix that interpretation by the judicial branch. So I'm not sure if I got all that right, but if I didn't, then let's talk about it.
You got it all right.
All right. So again, looking at on the definition of firearm, let me see if I can give me, Dan, can you go get us copies of the bill, please, of 490? So everyone has a copy. I'm not sure everyone had a copy. I thought they'd be here this morning. Let me pull up the current amended version here.
Mr. Chair, you do have a new amendment though to add to this, right?
I have what the Senate passed. So I believe is what the bill that Dan will print out is the current version of the bill.
Right, but you have new language to,
I don't, and I want to have a discussion because I can recess the committee and draft language. In my looking at this and looking at the history of, I think the history changed when if you look at our, say, the current version by changing expel a projectile by action of an explosive. It used to say gunpowder and by action of gunpowder. And that was meant to keep black powder out of the conversation. However, somewhere along the line, we changed this definition to say explosive, and that's where we have our issue. Is this court's ruling black powder or gunpowder identical creates an explosive action which fires a projectile, and so the word explosive is our problem, I think. And how we correct that to say that we can go back to the gunpowder definition and then explicitly, my thinking is we go back to the gunpowder definition and make an explicit statement that black powder is not included in the definition of firearm. And that would be cleaner than referencing the federal language, but I'm open to discussion on that.
I like what you said.
So the amendment, if we were to do one, would say we'd go back. If you look at the email I sent out that has the history under number 1, just I'll use this definition because it's cleaner. You'll see a note under number 1, and it says firearm means any weapon, including a starter gun, which will or is designed or may be readily be converted to expel a projectile by force of gunpowder. So I want to use that definition, go back to that definition where we were, and then add the specific exemption of black powder. This firearm shall not include a weapon, starter gun, or weapon or starter gun that is powered by black powder. Is that amendable to everybody? Senator, go ahead.
So, I just want to make sure that the question is whether, I mean, I understand and support the exclusion of black powder, fine. But what I'd like to know, if your research has revealed this, that if we say gunpowder with the exclusion of black powder, are there any other explosives that might propel a projectile that is not included under the definition of gunpowder?
So your question is there any other weapons that would fire a projectile by way of black powder?
No,
basically.
My question is, does the definition explosive include any method of propulsion that does not include gunpowder or black powder?
For instance, Rambo with a thing on the end of his arrow.
Right. So again, but that's the arrow isn't projected by gunpowder, right? But that's so it'd be, but Colonel might have an answer for us. If he's listening to the conversation, he might have an opinion.
I'm a little confused on, answer the question about explosive. I don't know of anything other than gunpowder or black.
Okay. All right, fine. I just, the miracles of modern chemistry, right? I just, I wouldn't want to make sure, I wanted to make sure we weren't putting a loophole in here that some other form of chemical reaction that can fire a projectile would now be excluded. But if the assurance is that there is no such thing, although maybe somebody in their garage is somewhere working on it, then it's okay.
I am sure some lawyer somewhere will find a loophole somewhere that they'll try to exploit. So in everything we do.
We may want to exclude excesses of alcohol, which have been known to cause projectile incidents.
I think for most people, the difference between explosive and gunpowder is not understood to be black powder. So if we put in that, we added except for black powder, that would be clear to everyone.
Right, it'll be shall not include, for definition purposes, it shall not include projectiles fired by black powder.
Correct.
So if I may.
Go ahead,
Chairman,
Senator.
so your suggestion seems to be that leave explosive, but then say, for the purposes of this chapter, the term explosive shall not include black powder.
I think that accomplishes the same thing.
Whatever.
I'm okay with that unless someone could see some other loophole that we just created by doing that. So your definition, we want to leave the current RSA, the current definition, which says expel a projectile by action of an explosive. However, this chapter shall exclude weapons and starter pistols.
No, I think it'd say for the purpose of this chapter, the term explosive shall exclude black powder.
Okay.
I mean,
That sound good?
I'm sure somebody in OLS will figure out the much more elegant and correct phrase it, but I guess that's what we're trying to get at. Is that what you're suggesting, Representative? Is that more or less what you're suggesting?
Yes, more or less. You could just add by action of an explosive other than black powder, and that would do it. And that's the simplest solution, I would think.
Do we need to recess or?
I'll recess and then we got to be back here anyway. It'll give me time to run to OLS, give them the language. They'll draft it for us. We'll come back and get the exact language and then we'll vote on it.
Committees we've just written down and.
If everyone's okay with that, then I'll just go ahead and have OLS draft it and have it set up for signature. Is everybody okay with that language? We'll say for the purposes of this chapter, this definition shall not include weapons fired by black powder. Does that sound good to everybody? That would include a muzzle loader and that kind of thing. We are done. So that was a nice quick one. Now we got to wait till 9:30 for the next one. So go get a cup of coffee, bio break, whatever you need. The only discussion point is around who should make the decision. In the Senate version of the bill, they amended our bill. We had it going to the commission for an appeal process, and the Senate wants it go to the executive director. So I'm going to speak to the House position. There's an amendment in front of you. I cleaned up some of the language. And one of the reasons I cleaned it up is because the hearing process, the Senate left in section 1 of the bill, which changed the duties to include an appeals process, but then changed the appeals process in section 2 to say that the executive director was going to do it. So section 1 wasn't needed, but it's still in the bill. So I cleaned up the timeline, so it's nice and clean. On the House position, the idea is that we don't think an appeal process going to a person's boss, for lack of a better phrase, a single person, a single bureaucrat, is the appropriate action for a citizen who is in conflict with the department, because the executive director is going to take the position of his department and support his subordinate. And so the idea was that this bill would go in front of a commission, more than one person, and on a majority vote of that commission, the appeal could be turned over. I did incorporate in the amendment that's before you a lot of the Senate language. I agreed with the language that said unless the executive director issues a written decision that issuing a permit may pose a significant disease, genetic, ecological, environmental, health, safety, or welfare risk of persons, marine animals, or wildlife. So that was the Senate language, and I took that language and I moved it in. So it was good, clean language, and I appreciated the Senate for adding it. But again, I looked at this as similar to, I go back to a lot of the hats I wear. One of the hats I wear is I'm a zoning board chair. And when the zoning administrator rules on something, it doesn't go to the selectman or town manager for a decision. It goes to the zoning board of adjustment. So there's a board of 5 people that review the decision made by the decider to see if that decision was accurate. And then that board then votes on either overturning the decision by the zoning administrator or not. And if it overturns it, and it's moved forward. If they support it, then the decision support it. So again, the idea being that a citizen should have a chance to present its case to a board in what I consider a less biased board in the commission. So if any other House members want to speak to the House position, whether they agree, disagree, but again, we think it should be more than one person that makes the decision. The agency has the absolute right to deny a permit based on scientific grounds, present those scientific grounds in writing to the applicant so he knows why he's being denied and whether or not he thinks he has a basis for an appeal to the commissioners. So that is the basis of this email. Again, this thing is we had a citizen who was told no, and then that was the end of it. He had no place to go, and that's why this bill came forward.
So with that logic in place, Representative, should we do that with all the departments as well?
Where appropriate, I'm completely fine with that. If there's a commission, again, not all departments. Yeah, I don't believe the Department of Agriculture has a commission or a board that could appeal its decisions or anything else. Those decisions go to Superior Court. I'm assuming. I actually don't know. But in the case where there's a commission or board that you can appeal, again, we talked about the idea that every time we have a new law that comes forward in the Fish and Game Department, the Fish and Game Commission takes a position. So on the bills, they come in and we hear from what used to be Paul Sandstrom, and I forgot the other guy's name. I apologize. The new guy, woman. But it used to be that they would come in and they would say the commission believes and the commission thinks, and I serve on JALCAR, and they do the same exact thing when they bring in rules. They say the commission, the executive director created this rule, and the commission takes the position that they agree with this rule. So again, I think it's not uncommon for them to take positions on policy, and they review policy. So I think that a written decision by the executive director denying a permit could be reviewed easily by the commission, and if there's a sound basis in fact and the citizen gets the chance to give his opposing position, they can make the call just like they do on regular policy. Yes, go ahead.
Having sat on Fish and Game for 4 years and now R&D for 2 years, Fish and Game is unique in that it has a commission overseeing it. And in my opinion, It is the checks and balances that exists for a director position. He's not a commissioner of Fish and Game, it's a director. And so the commissioners have in the past commented on legislation that has come to the Fish and Game Committee. So I think it's appropriate that in an instance where a evaluation of a determination by a director of an appealed process has to have some level where the constituent in New Hampshire can take their appeal to. He can't be the only decision maker, especially when, and I agree with the representative, the chair, when he may be defending his agency or his employee. So there has to be a third party that can make a fair or balanced decision. And I think the commission is in place just for that reason and has done that. While I'm not a fan of how this bill came to us and the piece of legislation, the issue it was tied around, I think when we come to the idea of creating an opportunity for our constituents to be able to appeal any issue at an agency to a director position, and I would agree with you that commissioners probably have more control in terms of that they would not have checks and balances that's within their ruling, commissioners of DOT or commissioners of, other agencies. So I think within a director position that has a commission overseeing it, this would be an appropriate measure, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, when I was hearing the bill, apparently there wasn't any type of, cogent type of appeal process as is, correct?
That's correct.
Right, so this is, the Senate position is a step forward, is it not?
It is.
I really appreciate you saying that. Is it perfect? Chances are not. I was actually very frustrated in the committee because I really wasn't able to listen to a whole host of testimonies. I mean, people came in with charts, but we're getting rushed out and we were bottlenecked. But we did come up with at least a start. And that is the Senate's position at this point, which apparently that was one of the resting points when I left the room, that we got to fix this appeals process. And I think that's one of the things that we were successful at doing. And then we just kind of gave it a tweak. So we're hoping that you would see it our way and then come back another year and then help us to go further with the process if necessary.
So, Senator, if I can ask, can you tell me what is the, I'm going to use the word hang up on using the commissioners? Again, it's not an uncommon place for them to take positions, to make decisions based on what the executive director brings to them. And again, I think that by having it more than one person, we do our citizens the greatest good. By having, it's not just you got to convince one person, you got to convince a majority of the board
Right.
of the commission that your position is right and the commissioner's position is wrong. That's a pretty high hurdle for a person to overcome. And it gives them again, they don't feel like they're swimming against the tide, so to speak.
Well, I'm looking at it like a bird in the hand syndrome right now. So we have something that can be a fix. But I know that having spoken with my colleague, Senator Waters, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but one of the things that I think he has a concern with, and I'll let him speak to it, but it's just that Fish and Game is unique, and there tends to be a politicization of issues, and we don't want that to creep into this unique department. And it is a unique department. It's self-funded, blah, blah, blah. So we were just looking at having a bird in the hand and maybe coming back and saying, hey, if this isn't working, we can definitely readjust it. I'd like that opportunity, but I'd like to see at least something move forward. And I really think that the senators did an amazing job. So
You're the boss. You're the boss.
So Senator Waters,
Yeah,
Senator
I
Waters,
don't,
go
I don't need to add much. I mean, I think it's pretty clear what the Senate position is, and it'd be, I think, we found a way to move forward, but if the House doesn't want to move forward, then the bill can die. But I would say that in terms of your question, I spent my 4 years in the House on Fish and Game, and those who may not have been here remember back then that there were very different circumstances at that point related to around the commission. There was an audit, and things have not always been the way maybe they should be. But the real point here is that this ought to be a scientific-based decision. And that is what the Chief of Wildlife Bureau and what the director are primarily beholden to. We are in very, difficult circumstances about these disease vectors. It's not just COVID in the deer, it's not just CWD, it's not just the avian flu. We know about those, but one of the reasons that it was not just Colonel Jordan and Dan Bergeron who testified against the bill and thought that it ought to remain in the hands of the director, not the commission, because of the scientific issues. But notice we had Eric Anderson there. I do a lot of work with fisheries. I'm an Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission appointee from the from the legislature, and what an invasive species can do in the marine environment or in the aquatic environment on land is just devastating. We're seeing it happening right now in our coastal waters, and so this is something. And once it gets out, it's too late, right? So I think we made a good step forward with this. I agree there ought to be an appeals process. I think that's kind of universal to our function of open and transparent government. But I think we do need to trust the director here and the scientific staff on it. So I think as the chairman said, we made good progress. I think we can pass this bill as the Senate dealt with it, and if it proves to does not work, then we'll be back at it. But I think this will work. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, and I do notice that Colonel Jordan's here, and I know that the House had let other people to speak on, in committee of conferences, and I was wondering if we could ask his opinion.
Sure, right after Senator Gaida.
Of course.
I'm wondering if we have to have an either-or paradigm, or could we say something like the director in consultation with the commission? The director would retain the authority, but we bring the commission in as well. I have to respect the fact that the commissioners change, the knowledge level there changes. When you have an established base of knowledge within an agency and dealing with the disease vectors that we're talking about, the invasive species, COVID, you pick whatever it is, I don't think it's unreasonable to have the commission working with the director. I'm not sure we have to have an either or. I would say the director.
Sure, absolutely.
Certainly. So, for the record, every appeal that we have at the department involving we felt this was consistent to have this go to the director as well. The problem we get into with the commission is they're part-time, they meet once a month. Well, we're worried about that time frame issue if I can't get them all together. And the other issue that I have right now, I have an awesome commission. I don't always have that, quite honestly. And so I'm concerned about future commissioners. I think the director is where we do our license appeals through the director, the search and rescue billing goes through the appeal process goes through the director. A citizen can appeal there free of charge. They don't have to hire anybody. And then, beyond the director, if they're not happy with that and they want to challenge that in court, then they do that with all these other things. And I think following that same setup would be appropriate here. It's going to help us meet those timelines that have been placed in the bill, the limit of days where we're not going to have to worry about a commission meeting. So I think the director is very capable of making that decision. He makes all the others. So this would be just one of those.
Representative Khan.
Chairman, my question to Senator. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question to Senator who proposed that the director will be involved also with the commission. My question is, the director is going to be a voting member or not? I'm trying to understand.
I think he's the final decision. Representative, I believe he makes the final, or he or she makes the final decision as to the how the appeal will go.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
So if he is the final decision, so that means that the commission doesn't have any function if he is the final decision. So,
But-
so whatever we are trying to accomplish, you know, the transparency, some place to go, and citizens' rights, it's not working if he is the only final decision. So, go ahead.
And I do appreciate the comment, and I think one of the things that I'm just gleaning from Colonel Jordan's testimony is the fact that sometimes you have good commissions, sometimes you don't have good working commissions. Also, there's do we have a quorum? Do we have an emergency? Is there, if you're going to meet quarterly, or how, I don't know how you meet, but if timing has something to do with it as well. And so I would love to get something passed. I would love to get an appeals process started and working, and then come back and address this again in the next term. And I know, Representative, you have a.
Representative Kittredge?
Yes, thank you. I have a question for Colonel. How often do you have appeals to decisions by the director or yourself?
So on license appeals, we have probably 20 a year on license appeals. I don't, search and rescue appeals, we have very few, less than 5 in a year. And with importation issues, I'm going to tell you that we have very few disputes. There's only a couple of times that this becomes an issue. And I think it is important to have a way for people to appeal a decision, but it's not something that's going to happen a lot. One other thing that Senator Gaida said, if I may, he made reference to the director making the decision after consulting with the commission. I think that piece of it would allow him some freedom if we get into an issue of a quorum, as opposed to the way it's written now, where it's required as a majority vote. So if it's possible to have the director make the decision after consulting with the commission, I think that might free up our meeting. My concern is that meeting framework, getting a commission together every time that we have one of these and being able to stay within that time frame. If we could do
The
it after
reason I'm bringing the
consultation.
point up is that there's a truism, delay is the deadliest form of denial. And a lot of the people that are importing things and so forth are quite frankly in business, and delay could be denial if it's drawn out. And one of the common complaints among my constituents is how long it takes to push something past a bureaucratic environment that frankly is probably overloaded, especially in times of COVID. So I'm sort of speaking to that. And so I wanted to know whether this was an exceptional thing. If it was, then it would not be a big time constraint on the department to deal with. And as you say, there are very few appeals.
And that would be our concern with involving the commission, is that time issue. That's going to add time to it. Where now we have a system in place where the director hears these appeals on all these other issues, and it works pretty well. We feel it would work well for this as well.
So the other thing is that I've been brought up is that contacting how are these appeals made? Are they made in person before the department? Are they written or what?
So we send out a letter in all these other cases that I'm describing to you, we send out a form letter explaining the decision that's been made and the process to ask for an appeal. And we allow people to call in and schedule that appeal, or email back and let us know, or write a letter back, and we set those appeals up to be heard by the director following that. We have a time frame laid out.
But it is
so.
it's an in-person.
Absolutely, face-to-face hearing, yes.
Right, and
in the
they will know
director's.
at that time whether it's agreed to or not, or.
They don't know that instant. I don't let the director, I stop the director from making the decision with the person sitting in the room, because I think in some cases that could place him in harm's way. So on some of these things. So what I say to folks on tape, we record them all. What I say to them is the director will be making a decision within a week to 10 days, and you'll receive that decision in writing. And then we get the decision right out. So license suspensions, I get those memos out within 2 to 3 days of the hearing, so that, because I know people are waiting.
Well, I noticed in the Senate version that you have 60 days to appeal,
Right,
right?
right.
And it seems like there's a long, a long period between striking the match and seeing if it catches fire.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I can't remember the last time an importation permit went 60 days. We make those decisions fairly quickly and would allow for the hearing to happen quickly. I don't want the mechanical part of this, as far as who has to hear it, stretch out that time restraint. That's my concern.
Thank you very much.
60
Thank you.
days does work in favor of
It does.
of the individual making the complaint.
It does.
Yeah.
So, Representative Egan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think in consensus, we all want to make sure that there's an appeals process. I do highly respect the point of view of Senator Waters about that scientists and experts are making the decisions, where I could be more comfortable that the director makes the decision in consultation with the commission, so that at least there is an opportunity for the decision-making process to be moved along and another set of eyes on it. And I'd be comfortable if that's an amendment that sort of, I think, Senator, you are a senator, I can't call you a representative, Senator Gaida sort of reflected that would be a good sort of middle ground that I think we'd all be comfortable with. I would support something like that.
I can tell you the wording that could do it if you want it. If you look in Part B, any person who's denied a permit under subparagraph A may appeal the decision in writing to the executive director within 60 days of the denial. The executive director shall respond after consultation with the commission to the appeal within 60 days. Why not? It's consultation, consult.
Give me 1 second, Senator. I'm going to try and catch up on that.
That's line 14.
So you're on section B. Any person who's denied a permit under subparagraph A may appeal the decision in writing to the executive director within 60 days of the denial. The executive director shall respond to the appeal within 60 days. Can you tell me where that language was?
The executive director shall respond after consultation with the commission to the appeal within 90 days.
Okay, so I just have a couple comments on this, as long as we'll stick with the Senate version for right now and look where I have some issues. One of the concerns I have is I'm a little concerned, and maybe Colonel Jordan can speak to this. We specifically say in statute by the Senate version that it's the chief of the wildlife division shall respond. I had changed it to the executive director or his designee in the language I use, because I think you said, Colonel Jordan, before you didn't have this process, you didn't have this responsibility. Somebody else in the agency had this responsibility. I don't know if they're going to go back to that.
We heard in testimony quite clearly from Fish and Game that anything like this should start with the Division of Wildlife, because that is the scientist who's on top of this stuff. So that's why, if it's an appeal process, you have a decision made by the wildlife, and then the appeal goes to the director. So that's why the Senate did it the way it did.
So if I'm not mistaken, Colonel Jordan, that's different than the current process, which is you as the chief of law enforcement are making this decision and issuing the permit or not issuing the permit. Now we're going to be telling the agency it's the chief of wildlife, which is a different person in the agency.
And we talked about that before the hearing, in that I didn't feel I was the appropriate person to make that, because we would feel more comfortable the biologists make that decision, because it's a biological concern, and keep the director out of it at that point, and then have the appeal go to the director for the final decision after consultation, if you go that route with the commission.
So let me just I'm finishing this sentence. So we have the chief of wildlife division who's going to respond to the request, but in the second sentence of that section, it says the permit shall be granted within 60 days unless the executive director, right? So now we've moved that somehow division is going to respond to the request, but the executive director is actually making the decision. And so the question is, should that executive director language go to the chief of the wildlife division? Otherwise, you have the executive director appeal his own decision, because you've given him the decision in that second sentence.
Well, I think the problem there is the timing again, that, once the genie's out of the box here, if you've if he's said yes, and the executive director thinks, wait a minute, this is terrible decision, the the executive director is the boss there, not the chief of wildlife. So, you know, there needs to be this gatekeeper. They're really in the executive director, and then the appeal can be made. An appeal with this proposed amendment would bring in the commission, so there are some other eyes on it. But this is not. I mean, I'm just trying to emphasize, because of the work that we've done the last couple of years on the issues about these potential diseases, that this is a system that requires caution.
Senator, I'm not disagreeing with you. Again, I want to protect our herds and our flocks and all whatever else you call everything else that's around the state, and our wildlife. I'm just looking at process, right? I'm just cleaning up process. So what in this we have the executive director making the determination, and then we have the executive director doing his appeal of his own determination, which doesn't seem appropriate to me. Right. Again, if we're going to use the chief of the wildlife division to shall respond to a request, then I'm guessing that in that second line, it should say if the wildlife division determines that issuing the permit, I'm just, you can't have the executive director appeal his own decision. He's already made his decision. That would be kind of redundant. So either if we're going to leave that language in there, then it has to go to the commission, because that's the next step up. So I'm trying to understand, again, this is a process question. Senator Gaida.
I would concur with that. I would think that if the wildlife folks are the biologists that are going to do the scientific analysis, they issue the opinion or the denial, and then that gets appealed to the director with consultation of the commission. That to me makes a sensible process. I would agree that you cannot appeal to the very same person that denied the request initially.
If I may, Senator Gaida, the problem there, though, is that, let's say that the director, the wildlife, makes a decision that the executive director thinks is a mistake, then it's too late. Because if under this, it would be that if you see, if the decision goes in favor of the person, then there's no appeal, right? It's just done under this proposed change. And that, I'm nervous about that, because I think that an appeals process, you know, denial, then you have the process. But in this case, it's kind of like an emergency where the director says, wait a minute, there's a significant problem here that may not have been sufficiently considered.
If I might, Senator, I think that the director himself probably relies on the knowledge of his wildlife people. I don't know. I think that the director's position is more of a generalist. He may have certain specialties and experience, but I think he would rely on his wildlife person to make the scientific analysis, and he would then, upon appeal, review that. I would say that at some point we're going to have to trust the department's science resources to not make a bad decision and start importing something that's harmful to us.
So what I'm gathering, even through this whole discussion, we have potential time delays if we add an extra layer of conversation to this. We do not have an appeals process that's working right now. The Senate is offering a start. And just by the conversation that we're having right now, it seems as though it's getting complicated to where we should get a bird in the hand, come back, and modify in the next session. But I think this right here gives us a process to get started, and then we can come back and we can revisit this and with, you know, with a full hearing. But I think, as the representative said, you know, time delayed is you know, it's not working in favor of the people that are wanting the appeals, because yes, now we have an appeals process that's going to go to the commission, it's going to go to this person, it's going to come back, but we need a time, you know. So my humble opinion is we have something. Let's go with this.
So Senator, again, time delay, the timing in your language and the timing in my language going to the commission are exactly identical, 60 days and 60 days.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't create a delay for anybody, right? So between the two bills, there's no difference in time. The process is exactly identical. The 60 days for a decision, 60 days for an
No,
appeal.
60 days
So-
for an appeal, not 60 days for a decision.
Nope, they both have 60 days for a decision. built into the bill. They may not take that long, but so
Okay,
I just want to take that discussion off.
yeah, we're leaving, so we're missing
So
a sentence.
my only concern is you have the executive director, based on your bill, appealing his own decision. And I'm not sure how that suits anybody. So again, I think that if we just make that one change, the chief of wildlife division, right, unless the chief of wildlife division determines it, and I would add the word in writing, that issuing a permit may pose a significant risk, right? And then you appeal that decision to the if they're denied by the chief of wildlife. I'll accede to the Senate position with some minor changes, only because I think procedurally we're wrong. I think procedurally having us appeal the executive director's decision to the executive director is like asking me if I'm going to change my own opinion, right? I've already stated my opinion, right? And so I think that just making that simple change of saying unless the chief of the wildlife division determines in writing that issuing a permit may pose. That's all I'm asking for. Is I think that change fixes the problem so that we don't have a stacked case against a citizen.
Repeat that one more time, please.
So in the second sentence, the permit shall be granted within 60 days of the request unless the chief of the wildlife division determines in writing that issuing a permit may pose significant da-da-da-da-da.
I'm sorry, I just don't think we can have something that says that if it take you 60 days, you get your permit. I'm sorry. I think
That's already the Senate position. Only thing I'm changing is to making sure we don't have the citizen doesn't feel the guy who made the decision's got to hear his appeal. Because that's how your bill's, that's how the Senate position is currently written. And I'm just asking that the chief of the wildlife, who you put right in the front, shall respond, right? You already have that, said that that's the person responsible for making the determination. I'm just asking that we stay consistent with that and says unless that same person determines that issuing a permit is bad. I just think it's consistency. I really like to pass something and have an appeal.
Do we have just 1 minute?
Yes, you may. We'll take a short break. His own decisions, right? That's just going to go. I was already right. I'm still right. We're back in session.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think right now, I think we're going to just have to not accede to the House and just leave it as it is. We're just going to keep the Senate position at this point. I really think we should come back another session, fix whatever we do, but we got a bird in the hand. That's where we're going to leave it at this point. And I love you.
So you want, so we want to leave it so that the executive director is going to appeal his own decision.
We got to start. We'll move forward next time. trust me, and I'll give you.
But we are including that in consultation with the commission in that.
No, I'm just the Senate position, and I understand that's heartburn, but I can give you my word that I will we'll come back and address this. My concerns with the commission, it adds extra time, so I just, it's getting squirrely to me, and I'm not comfortable with that and making a lot of these decisions on the fly. I'd love to revisit this. And like, I give you my word that I will give you my best when we come back next session to make some changes if necessary.
House members, conversation. Do you want to accede to the Senate position? I think we're creating a logical fallacy in our discussion where we have the executive director appealing his own decision. I think that's just, we either trust the science or we don't. We trust our biologists, we don't. And now we're saying, well, we trust our biologists, but not really, because we want the executive director to actually decide and possibly overturn the scientists. I don't know how that makes any sense, but what do you want to do? Do you want the bird in the hand to take the Senate position, or do we just want to walk
I've been
away
doing
from
too
this
much
thing?
talking. I want to hear my other two colleagues first.
Representative Abul?
Thank
Or
you, Mr.
Representative Khan?
Chairman. My thinking is the commission is already doing this kind of things, in all different ways. And the other thing is they represent all different part of our state. So it'll be more transparent. It'll be voice of the people than how it feels. But then again, I really don't want to see that this thing dies here, because the number of people came here and all the testimony and all the work and everything, our work, the clerical work and all these things just dies just because of that. I really like to see that we take another 5 or 10 minutes to think about how we can make a compromise. That is my, proposal to all of you.
Mac?
I'm reminded that we in the legislature, as juries are in civil and criminal cases, the final word, not the executive, not the governor, not the judge. And so there must be a role for the commissioners in this, I would think. And so I am in favor of the compromise. On the other hand, the good senator has said a bird in the hand is a great place to start, and it's hard to argue with that. We're a long way, we're closer to it. Perhaps the reason for an appeal would be that the original application would be modified by recurrent events and so forth. So I'm willing to go with the bird in hand at this moment. And with the experience that comes in the next year, with the advice of Colonel Jordan, perhaps we can refine this further.
So-
we didn't get to our body of law overnight, and I don't think we can. The feeling in the Senate is such, it's either this or nothing.
So I'm just going to ask Colonel Jordan once, because I saw him bobbing his head yes that I was right. So that's why I'm going to make him come up and say I'm right. Again, Colonel Jordan, again, I'll accede to the Senate position with the one minor change of the fact that I don't think the executive director should be appealing his own decision. That just doesn't, the citizen's not going to feel that's right. And they're like, wait, the same guy that already told me no, I've got to ask him to change his mind. And that just, the citizen is kind of left out in the cold, in my opinion. In this process by doing this, is it's might as well not have a process, because these odds of this of the commissioner changing his mind is pretty, or the executive director is probably pretty zero. And so this is all about the citizen and creating a process that makes the citizen feel that they were heard, that they had avenues to do something. And so, Colonel Jordan, so how do you feel about the idea of changing the that second sentence in this bill that says unless the executive director determines to unless the chief of wildlife division determines, which in the first sentence is who we say is the decider anyway.
So I'm not sure I'm looking at the same version, but the way that we would like to see it work, we think basing it on how we're doing it now with these other decisions, where the the appropriate chief makes a decision. Then we give them that in writing and allow them an opportunity for a hearing before the director to appeal that decision. We don't involve the commission. We don't involve any of that delay. And then it's up to the chief to come to like I do for license suspension, to go to the director and say, I made this decision, director, based on this, this, and this. I defend my position. The citizen gets to put in their ideas and defend their position, very much like a trial, and then the director has that final say. To me, that's the appropriate way to do this, the same way we're doing all our other processes. It works very well. We haven't had any issues with it, and I feel if we could get there with this, we would have it. I do think an appeal is important. I'm not concerned about the director not being involved in that first step, because I think that's more appropriate for the scientist in this case. And then they go and defend that decision with the boss when people appeal that to the director, and leave the commission out of it.
Mr. Chair?
Senator?
I got a pop. All right. Okay, so here's what we could do. The chief of the Wildlife Division shall issue a written response to a request for a permit within 60 days of a submission for a final request. Sorry.
So
Then, excuse me, then strike the next sentence. Just strike it. The permit shall be granted within 60 days. Just strike it. And then, any person who was denied a permit under paragraph may appeal the decision in writing.
So, Senator, again, the language you're looking at in the Senate position, which is what was passed, the only issue that we're calling it is that unless the executive director, that language right there, those 4 words, and making that being unless the chief of wildlife division.
No,
Otherwise, that's not the Senate position. You've already passed the Senate position of that the permit's granted within 60 days if the agency doesn't respond. Otherwise, there's no recourse for the citizen.
excuse me. What this would do would be to say, the chief of the Wildlife Division shall issue a written response request for permit within 60 days of submission for a final request. Then there's nothing after that until you get down to B. Any person who's denied a permit under subparagraph A may appeal the decision to write an executive director within 60 days of the denial. The executive shall respond. I would assume, as Colonel Jordan has indicated, that the chief of the Wildlife Division is going to take into account significant disease, genetic, ecological, environment, health, safety, or welfare risks to persons, marine species, or wildlife. So the chief of the Wildlife Division makes a decision. If it's a denial, the citizen can appeal to the executive director. That's the process.
And what happens if they don't make a decision?
What?
What happens if they don't make a decision? That's the purpose of the second sentence, is to force action. Make sure it isn't just done by delay. We do this in a lot of bills. We're doing a lot more responses.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, but it says the executive director shall respond to the appeal within 60 days. Now, if at that point that it's still denied and the person doesn't like it, they can go to court.
So the question again comes back to, if the chief of the Wildlife Division just chooses not to act and just sits on it.
It says right here in the sentence, if you'll notice, the shall issue a written response to request for permit within 60 days of a submission of a final request. You got 60 days and you got 60 days.
Again, Senator, so the question is, if the chief of wildlife does not issue a ruling, just doesn't do anything with the permit's submitted, even though it says shall,
They've broken the law.
that may be, but the citizen's still left hanging out there.
Well,
And the point of the 60-day is to force them to issue a ruling. And if they don't, then the assumption's yes.
Mr. Chairman, I think we've made an awfully good proposal. If you don't like it, then we
Okay.
can wait till next year.
House members, how do you want to go? They're not willing to move off their language in any meaningful way that's reasonable.
That's our compromise.
That's not a compromise. That makes the bill worse.
Fine. fine, okay.
That's not a compromise. The only question we had was who hears the appeal and who makes the decision. Those are the two questions. You're asking in your version of the bill, you want the decision maker, and now we're going back on the fact that it's a shall, that they have to respond within 60 days. Otherwise, nothing happens to them. And that's not the point. The point of the bill was to help the citizens. And by not putting a timeline in there that makes it so that if they don't act, there's consequences, then we've done nothing for the citizen. They can't appeal a non-decision. You willing to walk away, guys?
Could shall be replaced with must?
Well, it's the same language. So it's shall, must is the same.
Well, shall is optional, must is a requirement.
No, may is optional. Yeah. Are you guys willing to walk away from this? I don't want to walk away from this again. I think I'm just asking for a cleanup of the process. Now we want to change the entire bill. Okay, we're done. We'll non-concur.
Why don't I open the committee of conference then on House Bill 1586, FN, an act relative to the likeness of Wentworth Cheswell at the State House. The House position, we do have a side-by-side. Are you comfortable with the side-by-side? Do the senators have that, Jennifer? Yeah. Okay. Why don't we start from the point of view of hearing why the Senate decided that the unanimous decision of the House was not acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd be glad to speak to it. We had considerable discussion about the fact that there is no known image of Wentworth Cheswell. And that would put us in the position that the language of the bill itself could not work because it directed the Historical Committee to accept a likeness of Cheswell, whereas if there was no possibility of creating a likeness of him, the Historical Committee could never accept such a portrait. We did a lot of consultation with the Black Heritage Trail in New Hampshire. I happen to be a member of that board, and other groups who've done research on these areas, and there was a real kind of sense that if you presented an image which in a sense was well, what can I say, constructed or imagined or invented, then we in a sense would be presenting something that could be very troubling in what it claimed to represent. What we know about Cheswell is he had his mixed heritage, and we don't know, was he light-skinned, did he have straight hair or curly hair, what were his features? We know none of this, for that reason, it was feared that whatever portrait was created would be an invention. And we've been, in many circumstances over many years where people's imagined ideas of African Americans have been very problematic. That you would be creating something that was based on somebody's imagined image of what a black person may or may not have looked like. So that's why we thought that what would be really much more appropriate would be to have a plaque. It could be prominently displayed in the hallway where the Revolutionary War folks are commemorated, right across the visitor center, so we have high visibility. And the plaque, as you go around the State House, it affords an opportunity for much more information about an individual. So that was our position, and I will just say that that's basically what the Senate position is, and I don't think I would hope the House could accede to it, because otherwise I fear the bill will just fail.
Thank you, Senator. Anyone from the House side like to respond?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Wall.
Thank you very much.
Representative Wall, sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Quite all right. Thank you so much. It's true, we don't have an actual picture of Wentworth Cheswell. However, we have had in the past a portrait of a governor, Governor Keyes, pronounced Keyes but spelled Keys, for dozens and dozens of decades hanging on the second floor, only to find out that wasn't him at all. And people looked at him and read the plaque and believed the plaque and believed that image was him. We also have an image of Marilla Ricker from Dover. And I mentioned to the artist that for the photographs we have of her, the image looked quite different. And she said, well, Marilla Ricker looked very severe. She thought she'd take artistic license with the portrait and soften it so it doesn't look that much like Marilla Ricker. We also have portraits of people wearing tricorn hats and wearing wigs. We don't know exactly what they look like. There is a problem here because we don't know exactly what Wentworth Cheswell looked like, but we could very well do a likeness, and we all have the writings, the plaques underneath the portraits that give plenty of details about these people, and we could introduce that portrait by saying this is a likeness because we do not have an actual image from which to work. I think with the clothing that we would put on him and whatever background we might or might not use could be enough to give a sense of when this man lived. We know that he was not 100% black. We know that he was a mixed race, but he was the first person of mixed race to ever be elected to any office in this country. And my concern is if we put up simply a plaque that all the people all the visitors from around the state and around the country, around the world who come, as well as the fourth graders who come every year, won't even look at a plaque. People need something to see, an image of some sort. And I was thinking recently when I was down in Portsmouth looking at the amazingly wonderful tribute for the Black Heritage grave area. I don't know who stood for that image of the woman standing there with her hands, but I thought we didn't know what each one of these people really looked like either. And granted, we want to know what people really look like, but I think there's enough information that we could put up a likeness of him, document that it is a likeness because we don't have an actual image going way back to the 1700s. And I think it would be important because, again, people would at least have some concept. Look at what I saw at the State House. Thank you.
Thank you.
If I may respond to that,
Senator?
I was involved with the African Burying Ground process there, and the figures there, if you read about it, were meant to represent Mother Africa. No person, one was Mother Africa, and another was meant to represent a person in bondage. There was no pretense that these represented any living people. They were symbolic. Now, the issue here is you can look up the definition of likeness. It's a semblance, resemblance, or a portrait. And and again, I was also involved in the Harriet Wilson project, which created the monument for her, first woman of African descent to publish a novel in the history of the world, 1859, over in Milford. And there was a very, very thorough process of discussing what should be presented there, because for her, in her autobiographical novel, there were extensive descriptions of her there. And also there was a drawing of her that was on a label of the hair restorer that she used. Do we really want to get in a situation where we are saying to an artist, well, and this is the kind of conversations that went along with the Harriet Wilson one. Well, does the person look African enough, or African American enough? Or what if the person was so like complected that people look at the portrait and say, why you have a portrait of a light complected, or what visually would tell you one thing about race? Or if it is another kind of an image that is not him, but features what people might imagine are African American features, whether it's hair, physiognomy, or skin tone, then we have also, I think, used 2022 conceptualizations of what racial depiction is. And I think that is something that has been extremely problematic in our past about creating these invented images. And I also, as an educator, I don't think that we want to have our school children come in here and presented with what would be a false image. A false image. Why would we be doing that as a state legislature, to present a false image? And I don't know what happened with that portrait of the governor that wasn't the portrait of the governor. I think it came down. And Ricker, at least, artistic license somewhat, but it was off a photograph. Look at the photograph, and sure, she's a little improved, but there was a photograph. Or Alexander Twilight, who, from Vermont, state representative up there, founded Academy, which is, the building is still there, extraordinary individual, novels written about him. But there's a portrait, and there was a photograph. And that photograph was what the artist could use for the one that was created. So, and I think also to presume, we are in an age of images, but to presume that people cannot receive information other than by having a likeness or an image or a picture, I think really sells short our guides, our students, our public who could appreciate information and maybe let their own mind kind of imagine what Wentworth Cheswell's life was like. I will say too, that what we know from Wentworth Cheswell is that he really valued his handwriting. that at that time, as a person of African descent, to be able to sign your signature meant that you were recognized in the eyes of the law. This is an extremely important test. And he, in his work in Newmarket, he copied the town record because he thought the British might burn them and they're on deposit in the University of New Hampshire Library. And he signed a lot of documents. You can go online or you can go see the originals and you see his signature. And so if you want something from his hand on a plaque, or that is a likeness or resemblance, I could reference to you, the individuals who wrote, Phyllis Wheatley writing to George Washington, or others writing to Thomas Jefferson and having their signature, that their hand would be recognized, or the petitioners, the slave petitioners in Portsmouth, who wrote their signatures very large. You can go up to the State Archives and look at it, because it meant that their signature meant that they were recognized as human beings. So we have an opportunity there to do something. But as I said, the Senate position is what is going to be here. Senator Carson confirmed this. We hope the House will accede, or else the bill will die.
I'd like to give the opportunity for the prime sponsor to chime in. Representative Di Lorenzo? Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. My name is Representative Charlotte Di Lorenzo, and I'm the prime sponsor of HB 1586 FNA. I think it's really, really important that we get this portrait done and displayed in the State House, mainly because of Wentworth Cheswell's accomplishments, his duty to the country as a Revolutionary War soldier, and all of the things that he established in my town of Newmarket, including a free library. Now, there's been debate about what did Mr. Cheswell really look like. He was of mixed race African descent. Senator Waters just mentioned another character, historic character, Alexander Twilight from Vermont, whose portrait was unveiled on May 4th in the Vermont State House. I see a lot of parallels with Wentworth Cheswell and Alexander Twilight, and that just makes me more compelled to support this bill. As we know, it passed in the House on a voice vote unanimously, and I think that we need to close the circle on this and get this portrait done however we do it. And as for objections that we're not quite sure what he looked like, we don't want his hair to be too curly, we don't want his skin to be too light or too dark, I think that we do have artists who could project a really good likeness of Mr. Cheswell based on his ethnic heredity and based on his descendants and what they looked like. I hope that you will vote to complete and pass this bill. Thank you. And I'm open for questions.
Thank you. My understanding is that the donor group for the portrait was going to access a painter who has experience in this type of issue of interviewing the descendants and building that composite from either not eyewitnesses but from documented history of what the relatives look like. Is that your understanding as well, that
That is, sir.
this person has experience with this portrait painter?
Yes.
Thank you. Representative Roulard?
Thank you. I just want to say that one of the most important things that I have seen here at the State House is when the fourth graders come to the State House. And the questions that they ask when they sit in Reps Hall about the buttons and about the pictures. And the times that I've been here, the little girls that were fourth graders were thrilled to see women, females on the wall. We have more diversity coming into the State House now with all different nationalities, including Black, mixed race, the entire gamut. And wouldn't it be wonderful for these children to identify with someone that is a mixed race rather than looking at a plaque and not understanding that this person is perhaps like them? So I think that is a most compelling reason that we need to do it. They're not going to be looking, the kids are going to walk right past a plaque and they're going to be looking at the portraits. And I understand that it may not be exactly, but the most important aspect of the picture is that he was biracial and partly Black. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, if I may respond to a couple things. You can do the science on it, you can do the math, or you can go to the scientists on whether descendants provide any guide. When you get 6 to 8 generations down, by the math, you're at less than 2% of the DNA from that descendant. The way the DNA is actually passed down, and I will use the scientific and technical term that is you can find on the internet, by 8 generations, the amount of DNA from the original person is quote unquote vanishingly small. So it is no reliable guide whatsoever as to physiognomy or anything else about someone who was 8 generations previous. That's just the science on it. I will say, secondly, that I'm just really anxious about going into the territory of our imagining what, well, not necessarily biracial, a Black grandfather person looked like at that time. And I'll just be personal about it. Our son is African American, and he is someone who, at a very early age, recognized the kind of images and the presentations and the difficulties in his classroom of kind of fantasized images. In fact, they had, plantation images of happy slaves on the schoolhouse wall of his 4th grade. And this is disturbing to him. And to see that someone would have imagined, and again, I'd say, Representative, are you going to sit there and with a color chart describe, how much? Look at the portrait of Wentworth of Alexander Twilight. You look at that portrait, you think you're looking at a quote-unquote white man, at the photograph. And so what is it that we would put up there and try to tell the school children that we are wanting them to accept as basically a racial fantasy about what this person looked like? Why would we even want to go down that road when we have a very good option here? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Riccardi? I'm sorry, Senator Riccardi, did you have something you wanted to come?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the place that we can all agree is that Wentworth Cheswell should be recognized and was a very amazing person. But we feel in the Senate that you're doing a disservice to him to put up a fictitious portrait. Now, to speak to the point of the 4th graders, I've been here with many of my 4th grade classes just this week on Monday with Jaffrey. The tour is done very well. Things are pointed out. It doesn't have to just be a portrait, but for people to really recognize what this man was about will be identified. Perhaps the best way to go is to do the plaque rather than have a fictitious portrait, have this man properly recognized and honored, and then maybe somewhere down the road there are some historians there can dig up something further of a photograph. Maybe there's something somewhere down the road, but that's the Senate position. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Quick question I have on the Senate version is, to accept a gift, is there a Senate provider or a donor of this plaque?
That is kind of boilerplate as to what we do rather than expending state funds, but I can assure you that that money could be raised, perhaps by the Black Heritage Trail or other groups. I will assure you that. You may have noticed that a marker went up in Wyndham last weekend to commemorate people, enslaved and free Black community in Wyndham. There's one going up over in Rockrest and Kittery on June 4th. There's going to be others in Dover and elsewhere. I mean, this is statewide trail, and those plaques cost maybe $3,000 each. I don't remember the most recent plaque we put up the price, but anyways, yes. So I'm trying to I should just give a short answer to your question. Yes.
There is. Thank you. Representative Espedia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I understand where you're coming from. I definitely get it because, I definitely don't want to misrepresent somebody, but at the same time, I think, as a person of color, I walk around these halls and I see nobody that looks like me. And I don't know if there ever will be a portrait of somebody who looks like me. I hope so in the future. Part of the joy I get in the 4th grade class coming over is when I get to speak to my 4th grade elementary school, Lead Street Elementary School, and I get to speak to them in Spanish, and the kids go bananas because about half the school are Spanish speakers, which is incredible. But one of the things we're trying to do here is trying to memorialize an amazing man, and try to raise up his legacy here in the State House. And I worry about the optics of a plaque versus a portrait simply just not being enough. And being enough is just a longer conversation that we can that happens. And one of the things I get concerned about, it's like, it doesn't raise it. So to me, it feels like, is not raised to the level of stature of a portrait. So it's a difficult decision to grapple with. And that's why I believe, we in the House would love if the portrait rather than the plaque. So
If I may just add, Mr. Chairman, if you walk around the State House, you notice that some of the people of the highest honors that we accord are Medal of Honor winners and others. It's a bronze plaque. And I agree completely about needing to diversify the representation of this state through portraiture. We have the opportunity, certainly, for the first African American House member to be commemorated in portrait, were we to choose to do so. I hope people saw last week that Tom Hooker died. What an extraordinary man, an extraordinary history of state and national service, and his wife too. The portrait of both of them, Eleanor Williams Hooker, what they did together here in this state as pioneers. Extraordinary opportunity, I think, with them. So there's no shortage of people to commemorate in such a way. And as I said, I think we'd be magnificently pleased with the results of having this plaque and where it would be displayed and the stories that could be told about it. But we wouldn't be propagating a false image. And so, I don't want to belabor it, but from Senator Carson, who made it very clear in conversation yesterday where the Senate was at. And I hope that the House will exceed. Otherwise, it's going to have to just wait for another year.
Representative Wall?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Waters, for your information and for your commitment to this. Again, I go back to the fact that we've got plaques under every single portrait, and people don't really read those plaques, except on a rare occasion for a rare individual they might find. Is there no way you could come up with a reasonable compromise? We have a commitment from the public to pay for this portrait, for a portrait of a likeness, something that people can really see visually. something that people just won't see words on the wall. And we all know that words are very important, and we all know that they're very important uh, efforts and commitments that Wentworth Cheswell made in his life that need to be memorialized. But there needs to be more than just a plaque. Can you come up with a compromise of some sort?
Well, I would thank you, Representative, and I would say that I've mentioned the signature. Certainly, if you want to commemorate his ride, with Paul Revere, you could have a figure on a horse back. You could have a Masonic sign on this. You could have an image of the Newmarket Town record book. You could have an image of his house. I mean, there's no shortage of visual attractions that could be put on a plaque to get people to stop and take a look at it, and maybe even be more extensive than that. But there's no such thing as a portrait of Wentworth Cheswell. There is no such thing. There is no such thing as a likeness of Wentworth Cheswell. So that's where we are. And I will just say, that we hope the House will accede to the Senate position, as otherwise Senator Carson says that we're just going to be done.
Yeah, I think we will take a break because I'm fairly certain that the House doesn't see it that way. But we'll
Okay.
have a conversation
we
about
can
it.
be done. Okay.
Senators, we've had our conversation. We are very much stuck on a visual. It was interesting to us to hear you mention a rider on a horse. Would the Senate be amenable to that type of an accompaniment to the plaque of a rider on a horse, where that discussion of the rider that rode north from Boston, where Paul Revere rode west, would that be something that the Senate would be amenable to changing their proposal?
Chairman, why not? I mean, I don't think you need to change the language. I mean, the process of deciding what's on the plaque is something that we would do. And you could have right on the plaque a nice image at the top of somebody on a horse, and you wouldn't get into the business about his features necessarily, You got the tricorn hat, and you could have it right on a plaque. And the tour guide say, "Did you know that Wentworth Cheswell rode with Paul Revere, and he was from Newmarket?" And and I think his signature under it. I mean, I think it's what we would do is work with with deciding on this, and the wording is extremely important, as I know from the Black Heritage Trail putting up its trail markers. It's extremely important. It's extensive committee work and historical researchers who come up with the language so that you have that right. So I think that that if you go to the plaque, and we could just say we want, if you want to add something with images commemorating his accomplishments or his life, you could add that, or just assume that in the plaque, the process is we're going to end up with something like that. So,
I don't think we need to, we should assume.
yeah, so.
Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator. But then we come up with the problem of money because we don't pay for,
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
the problem is the money then. Because you say we can come up with the money for the plaque. Well, the Historic Committee does the plaques anyway. We come up with the money for that. But when it comes to someone on a horse, I don't think the Historic Committee is going to come up with something like that. We've already got a commitment from the outside, from a portrait. So I'm thinking we could still have a painting if the Masons in New Hampshire are still willing for this kind of compromise to have a painting of a colonial person horseback riding from Portsmouth, I guess it was, to Exeter to warn about the British are coming, make sure he's going in the right direction. And that would be rather significant. To try to put all this on one plaque, I think would be expensive. I don't know who would pay for it. So what are you thinking of then, where we do have a financial commitment from the outside?
I think that there would be, I think it would be an opportune moment for fundraising to cover the cost of this. I think I do think that would be accomplished. I think we are where we are. And if you'd like to put in some language in this that says with appropriate images commemorating Wentworth Cheswell, fine. Then there we are.
I think we will need to draft, just for the assurances that it will not be a simple worded plaque. I think we do need either a relief, we need something on this plaque so that it generally will show what we've talked about. That being the case, we'll need to put together something with OLS and there'll be sign-offs. But I think we're in agreement that that failing to get the portrait that we feel still that was necessary, a necessary compromise might be the accomplishments shown.
Mr. Chairman, I hope we could work out the language here, because if we come back and it's language we're not going to agree to, what's the point? And
neither
so
will we.
Let's what do you? We have the Senate version here. What do you want to put in?
open to suggestions here.
It could say on line 5, well, it could say, accept a gift of commemorative historical plaque for Wentworth Cheswell, including appropriate images marking his accomplishments.
Go.
I think an appropriate image, that's very vague. We have to have, minus an actual portrait, we have to have a figure of, since you mentioned it, figure of a man on a horse. This still doesn't, I mean, we have to have an image that's more specific than what you've said, Senator.
Including appropriate images marking his accomplishments.
Mr.
Yep.
Chairman, thank you. But he had many other accomplishments besides riding that horse. You know, someone could very well take that language and do almost anything, just have someone sitting
Why
on it.
don't we say appropriate images marking his accomplish as approved by the Joint Legislative Historical Committee?
The actual bill.
So I'll read it again. A historical plaque for Wentworth Cheswell, including appropriate images marking his accomplishments as approved by the Joint Legislative Historical Committee, and oversee the placement of the plaque in the State House.
We don't have actual wording of what the plaque will say, right? I mean, I'm presuming the main point is that it will talk about his racial qualities. Is that, or racial history? Is that going to be included?
Well, I imagine, I'm sure you've looked at the wording on the historical marker that's placed at his gravesite in Newmarket.
Yes.
That is an awfully good template.
Yeah.
And that went through the process over there. I mean, I've been on the Historical Resources Committee with the Division of Historical Resources, and that vetting process for language that goes on state historical markers is very, very well done, and so that could certainly form a basis for it. So, but you could add appropriate images and descriptions marking his accomplishments. So, including appropriate images and descriptions marking his accomplishments as approved by the Joint Legislative Historical Committee, and oversee the placement of the plaque in the State House.
Yep.
I just want to make sure that we're going to have some man on a horse in the plaque, on the top of the plaque. And I think you may have alluded to that in what you're saying there, as long as that's because a visual is, to me, very important to the children coming through the State House. And they may remember all these, you know, other portraits, but riding on a horse and a plaque, and I think that the racial component of it is also very important. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's why I say referencing the plaque in the historical marker, Newmarket, because it talks about his descent.
Thank you.
And you know, I imagine, Representative Wall, you're going to be on the Joint Legislative Historical Committee, since you've probably been on there since there was a history in New Hampshire.
Having been there since the beginning of time, I
They're not
guess I'll
gonna
be
get
there
rid of
till I
you.
die, but I hope. But may I speak?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you very much. Senator, since the first physical thing that we know that Wentworth Cheswell did for our country was to ride from Portsmouth to Exeter to warn about the British coming after Paul Revere arrived in New Hampshire. I do approve of him, of an image of him on a horse. And I do, but I think some of the disappointment we've heard from people today is that and we feel he was the first person of color, so that must have to be elected to public office. Now, I don't know, we're focusing on the image of him on the horse for the Revolutionary War. Is there any way we can, besides writing it in the plaque, that we can acknowledge that he was the first person of color to be elected to office in the United States? I mean, I don't know if we can put that in the image somehow or not. I don't know.
Well, as I said, Representative, you're going to be on the committee, aren't you?
You're giving the committee a lot of responsibility.
Anyways, and I will just say historically, don't get me started, you mean, but he did things significant to our nation's history before he made that ride, because he was one of the early signers of documents about, protesting British authority and rule. He was there from the get-go on these things, and it's incredible, that he was willing to fight for freedom in these ways, and so I just think, and a plaque, the thing I like about a plaque too is that they can be pretty good size. You get a pretty good number of words on them, and there's,
Thank you very much for all that. And we do know that there's a lot to say about him. Do you happen to know of somebody who is accomplished enough who can undertake this kind of project?
Well, I would recommend actually, I'm sure you know the work of Richard Haynes, a very prominent African-American artist, and I think that tasked with the creation of a image of a rider or other things as well. And then there are others who do design work that the Black Heritage Trail has used, or the Seacoast African-American Cultural Center has used. And I would think that possibly the Joint Historical Committee would set up a little subcommittee that invites some of these folks to participate in creating the designs that are there. So I think it'd be a good process. And if this passes, we'd get right on it.
You are submitting that language we just discussed to
Well,
OLS, or?
Mr. Chairman, I've been on other ones. This is a House bill, so you'd have to submit the language. But if
Right.
this is the language we agree on, we can vote now, and you can have it, and we can sign off. When we sign off, we'll see what OLS has drafted.
Okay. Are we good?
Mr. Chairman, I
Yes,
just have one other thing.
Wall.
In the sense that we have disappointed a lot of people with this decision. We're satisfying some, but we're disappointing those who wanted this image in the first place. Can you come up with some way for us to let the Masons of New Hampshire know how and why we came up with this decision? Because they were fully prepared to pay for the portrait.
I'm sorry, is there a question in that?
The Masons of New Hampshire were going to pay for the portrait. That's why Paul Smith was here. He is a Mason. And they had committed. I don't know if you heard that testimony in the Senate or not, but when we heard testimony in the House, the Masons, the Order of Masons, I'm not sure how the term goes, were fully prepared to pay for the portrait. So based on the fact that we have changed our commitment to this considerably, how can we let the Masons know that in good faith, they were enthused and more than willing to come up with the thousands of dollars that would come for the portrait, but clearly I don't think they're going to pay for anything beyond that. How can we justifiably give our apologies to them, please?
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate the Masons as well. Again, if you go to Portsmouth, the tavern building there, which is immensely significant for Black history, it is still a Masonic lodge, but it is also operated jointly with the Strawberry Bank, and they spent how many hundreds of thousands of dollars to restore that, and to tell the stories of the African American inhabitants of that building. So I truly appreciate what the Masons have done on this. I would say there's nothing to prevent the Masons from having a portrait made of Wentworth Cheswell, which they could display elsewhere. I would hope that they would see, and that we might include a Masonic sign on the plaque that you know, and I hope they would understand from this conversations here, which have been extensive, what the issues here are. And I also would hope that they would consult more closely with the African American community in the future, when they have kind of concepts about this, because I think that's important.
Thank you very much.
Representative Speedia?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And, I think, I echo the sentiments, but I do think that, if we do get more, I know obviously we don't have photos in the 1700s, but in the future, if we do get any, anything with historical research, I'm hoping that we can highlight him. If we can get a portrait, if we ever got something like that, it would be great. But I'm hoping in the future, and I'm hoping, like you said, Senator, that we could diversify our walls, because I think it is important for our visitors who come through, that they see things that may look like themselves. So I appreciate your work on this.
Thank you. I'd like to close it by just saying I'm really disappointed. I thought we would be able to do something for the fourth graders, and provide an image that they could look at, and I am disappointed in the Senate. I will take a look at the language and submit it, and hopefully we will all sign off. Thank you.
We're not authorized to put it in the State House. They can do whatever they want, but we're not authorized to put it in the State House.